Good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight for this program, for tonight's program hosted by the LIZKOR to Remember initiative at Temple Beth Am. As tonight we bear witness to the story of Paula Hanover of blessed memory, whose testimony will be introduced in a moment by her son, Alain Hanover. Our Temple's initiative to collect and preserve stories from the time of the Holocaust is called LIZKOR, to remember, because Judaism is all about memory. The verb for remembering, zachor, shows up in the Hebrew Bible at least 169 times. 169 times, which tells us, of course, that memory is so important. It shapes who we are. It links us to our past and points us towards our future. But there are two ways that this imperative is framed in the Torah. On the one hand, we have the command zachor, remember. And on the other, we are told al tishkach, do not forget. And on the surface, those imperatives look the same, right? Isn't remembering by its nature not forgetting, right? What's the difference between the two? Why are we told zachor, remember, and al tishkach, do not forget? So the Midrash wonders about the difference between these two commands, and it makes a distinction between the two. Not forgetting, right? Al tishkach, says the Midrash, is a matter of the heart. That the heart and the mind should never forget whatever it is that we are meant to remember. So not forgetting, al tishkach, is an internal process. And so what then is the imperative of zachor, of remembering? So zikaron, memory, answers the Midrash, is about being shoneh beficha, that we repeat it with our mouths, out loud, over and over and over. Memory, remembering, is an external process that in order to work must be done over and over and over and over in order that our hearts and our minds should never forget. Tonight, we hear a life story shared from the heart, repeated and remembered as we allow the story of Paula Hanover of blessed memory to continue to resonate in our community and for her family. And so with that, I'm honored to turn it over tonight to Temple Beth Am member Alain Hanover, who will introduce the testimony of his mother, Paula.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm glad to have this opportunity to share the experiences of my parents during World War II so that others can learn from their experience. Even though many years have passed, their stories should never be forgotten. My mom was the youngest child of four, living a comfortable life in Radom, Poland, a town of about 60,000 in central Poland, 50 miles south of Warsaw. That was about half Jewish before World War II. Her world was torn apart at age 16 when Germans attacked Poland in 1939. Growing up, my sister and I knew very little about Mom's experiences during the war. She rarely directly referred to the Holocaust, nor did we inquire, but occasionally overheard discussions with relatives and friends, how she and they survived in multiple camps during the war. She gave her testimony to the USC-sponsored Shoah Foundation in a 5-part testimony lasting about 2.5 hours. We will show you key parts of that testimony tonight. My dad passed away 14 years ago, and my mom passed away 2 years ago at the age of 96. And we decided that now is the time to download this material and hear Mom's story in full earlier this year. It's important to recognize the Shoah Foundation that is housed at USC, begun and generously funded by Steven Spielberg about 25 years ago, that is dedicated to creating and preserving audiovisual interviews with survivors and witnesses of the Holocaust and other genocides. As of this date, they have accumulated 55,000 Holocaust-related testimonies, of which my mother's is just one. Before we watch Mom's recording, let me fill you in on my dad's unusual World War II experience. He was in the Polish cavalry at the start of the war, age 25, along with his younger brother, Nathan, age 21. When war broke out, Henry, my dad, and Uncle Nathan decided to go AWOL and rode their horses east towards Russia instead of waiting for the Germans to arrive in Radom. The Russians arrested them, and they spent much of the war years in a POW camp. As the war was ending, the Russians released the Polish Jewish prisoners, allowing the brothers to find a way back to Radom, Poland, to search for family survivors, but of course, without success. My mother was shuttled between different work and concentration camps and liberated in northern Germany by the Russians in the last days of the war. She then made her way back to Radom, interrupted by a few weeks in a Red Cross hospital to treat her for typhoid. Her search for survivors was equally unsuccessful, as the Radom Jewish ghetto, as you will hear, had been liquidated. Mom and Dad met in Radom at a DP camp and then moved to Paris, France, where my dad's other brothers lived before and after the war, and where my sister and I were born. Later, when I was 9 years old, they immigrated to the US and New York, living first in Brooklyn and then later in Queens. Tonight, you'll see excerpts of her testimony. As you listen to the interview, you'll see a very composed mother sitting in her living room, answer questions that guide her testimony. Her eyes fill with tears at times, but she never gives in to them. She recalls nearly every detail. Her anger is palpable as she is asked if she still thinks about the Holocaust. At the end, you will see Mom and Dad together, their reflections on what happened. I should note that she uses two French words on the recording. I should explain. Magazine is French for stores. Appel means to call. And the German word Geralotlager means equipment. So please watch her testimony detailing the horrors she witnessed and survived. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll have time to answer a few of them at the end of the tape. Tonight's presentation is being recorded, and if you're interested in getting a link, you can request it from the Temple office. Bill, thank you.
Today is December 4th, 1996. I'm conducting an interview with Paula Hanover. Her maiden name is Silberberg. My name is Rhoda Fischler. The interview is taking place in Melba, which is part of Whitestone, New York, in USA, and the language is English. What is your name?
Paula Hanover.
Would you spell that, please?
Paulahanover.
What was your name when you were born?
Pesa Silberberg.
Could you spell that too, please?
PesaCylberberg.
Did you ever have any other names?
No, I did not.
When were you born?
I was born in Radom, May 5th, 1923.
And how old are you now?
Now I am 72.
What large city is Radom near?
It was near Kielce in Warsaw.
And that's in?
Poland.
Did you grow up in Radom?
Yes, I did. I went to school in Radom.
What was your mother's name?
My mother's name was Blima Silberberg.
And what was her maiden name?
Gutman.
Was she known by any other names?
No.
Do you know where she was born?
She was born in Grujec. This was not far from Warsaw.
Did she work outside of the home?
No, she did not. My parents, they were quite wealthy. She didn't need to work.
Do you know if she was affiliated with any political parties or movements?
No, she was not.
Did she belong to any special organizations?
No, she wasn't.
What do you remember about your mother?
She was a gracious lady, good mother, a very, she kept her children just the way parents should keep, and educated and very orthodox, religious.
What happened to her?
When it was the first ghetto liquidation, she, my brother, my two sisters, nephews and nieces, they perished in Treblinka.
How do you know this?
Because nobody came back. I never found them. I never heard about them. And everybody else had the same idea and the same result than we had.
What was your father's name?
Aaron.
Was he known by any other names?
No.
Do you know where he was born?
He was born in Radom.
And what was his occupation?
He was they bought in a wholesale way raw skins in the fabricated leather. It's tannery called.
We call that tanning.
Tanning.
How did, was he ever in the military?
I don't remember. He must have been, because they drafted to the military in Poland. But I don't know about that.
Do you know if he was affiliated with any political parties?
No, he was not.
And what happened to your father?
My father passed away when I was a very small child. I was 2 years old. We were 5 children, and we were very wealthy because the other sisters and brother, he went to private schools, and nobody worked in the house. So, and we were, well fed, well lived, and because we were well off.
But you said your father died when he was very young.
Yes, he had a heart attack. That's what my mother told us.
Tell me about your brothers and sisters. Who was the oldest one in the family?
My oldest brother was Zelik. He was married. He had 2 children. He passed away 2 weeks before the liberation. He had a typhoid in Hessenthal. This information I got from his friend, which was with him together. And he told me very exactly he was buried. And I did go and to try to find his grave. But everything was grown with grass. And when I asked the people in Hessenthal, the Germans, they didn't want to answer. And I couldn't find exactly his grave.
Hessenthal then is in Germany?
In Germany,
Do you know where it is in Germany? What part?
It should be not far from Stuttgart, because that time I was in Stuttgart, and it took me a day to go and to come back, but I don't remember exactly where it is.
Okay, who was the next child in the family?
Was my sister, Hinda. She was married. She had 2 children. And she was also, with the liquidation of the ghetto, and her children and her husband, they perished in the same time.
Same time as your mother?
Your mother, yes.
And were there other children?
Yes, I had another sister, Hannah, and she was married. She had a daughter, a little girl, and she perished also at the liquidation of the ghetto. And then I had another brother, Abraham, and he went with my mother together. I was rounded up to work that particular day, and I was in this AFAL. Those were big magazines outside Radom, and they kept us over there for a few days. In the meantime, we found out that they liquidated the ghetto and what happened to all of them, which they've been taken away. After a few days, they told us that we can go home. They're going to take us, the Nazis, the Germans, which we were working for them there, that we're going to go home and pick up a few things and come back to work. And when we came to the ghetto, everything was empty, hollow, nobody, the windows open, the drapes flying outside. It was such a scary thing. It was really something which we would never dreamed of.
Are you describing what you found in your own home?
In my own home.
When was this?
This was, well, I'm very bad with the dates, but I know, how it happened and when it happened. This could have been by the end of 1941. And then I took a few things from my home, like dresses or things, and they took us back to the AFAL, and we worked over there for quite a while. Very hard work. I was 16, 17 years old then. And they were our bosses. We slept there. They gave us whatever they gave us. We couldn't complain, and otherwise we were punished for it.
We're getting ahead of our story. I want to go back a little bit because I'd like to find out more about what your family life was like in Radom before the war. What was your home like? Could you describe it?
My home, we had a large apartment. My parents, they were homeowners. And we had a building about 57 tenants. One of those tenants was one of the very respected rabbis, the Rebbe Rav Moishal, which my mother was very proud to have a tenant like this. And, like the rents, they came in, and we lived very well.
Can you describe what the synagogue looked like?
The synagogue in Radom was a very beautiful building. Very beautiful, big, really nice. But when the Germans came in, so the Poles, they broke the windows, you see, and it wasn't what it was before.
When did the Poles break the windows?
When they put us in the ghettos. So then they became, very cooperative with the Nazis.
Do you recall September 1st, 1939?
When the Germans marched into Radom? Yes, I did.
What happened on that day?
Well, that day what happened, it was a sad day for us. It was bad, but we didn't imagine that it can get voiced. They start to round up people to work. They called us Jews. They if they find a religious person with a beard, with these little caps which they used to wear, they just, like to my husband's father, they took the knife and they cut him a half a beard. It was very miserable. They start also take away things from families. Excuse me. They ask us to deliver, like pillows, for jewelry, and we oblige with that.
Before the war, did you have any non-Jewish friends?
I did, but not very close.
You didn't have playmates then?
No.
Did your mother associate with any non-Jewish people?
Not very much. We didn't discriminate, but we kept our distance.
Were there any non-Jewish people living in the apartment building that you lived in?
Yes, because we had the super. He was a Christian. Otherwise all the rest of tenants, they were Jewish.
Did you ever have any anti-Semitic experiences before the war?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell me about them?
Excuse me. It was a pogrom in Radom. I was a little girl. In the Poles, they ran like crazy in the streets. And when they saw a Jew, they beat them up. So we ran for cover. Then my sister Hannah, she had once, because we had the building, so we were involved, in legal processes, sometimes with the court. And with the tenant, we had a little bit of, disagreement because he didn't pay the rent. But my sister went to court and somebody pushed her. So she says, why did you do that? And she was wearing a fur coat. So this, how would I say, they would take like a liquid. They said that it was like potatoes, boiled potatoes, and they would spill on her because she was Jewish. The feelings, they weren't too good. But we had no choice. We had to live with it.
Did you share these stories with your mother?
Oh, my mother knew, of course. My sister came home and she showed her the coat and everything. Sure.
Do you know if other Jewish people in Radom were also having similar experiences?
A lot of them had the same experience because sometimes the Poles, they invented that we would say Polska świnia, that's mean Polish pig. And for that, they could take us to court and just to invent something like this. My memories from Poland when I was very young are not so good. I would rather talk as little possible about it.
Can you tell me about the Jewish community in Radom? What was that like?
It was a very large Jewish community, a very tight community. We practically knew one another.
How large a community was it?
It was, if I'm not mistaken, about 30,000 Jewish people.
What was the population of Radom?
About 60,000.
So about 50% of the people then were Jewish. Were most of these people observant Orthodox Jews?
The majority, yes.
Do you know how many synagogues there were in Radom before the war?
How many synagogues? This was the big... I know about 2 of them, but in private homes, you had also worship places, like the rabbi which lived in our building.
Did those private places of worship have any special names?
It's just the name from the rabbi.
What kind of reading materials were in your home?
It was Polish, because we were educated in Polish, and Jewish.
What kinds of Jewish books or newspapers did you have?
There were local Jewish papers which we read, so that we read also the Polish paper for news, you know.
What did you know about the rise of Nazism?
Before the war with Poland, some people from Germany, Jewish people, they came to Radom, which they escaped the Nazis. And we heard what it was over there, but we never thought it's going to happen to us.
What stories did they share with you?
They didn't want to talk too much about it. They were very fine people, very fine people. They lived on the same street a few houses away. Very elegant people, but they escaped from Nazism.
Had they been from Radom originally?
No, they're from Germany. They just came to escape.
Do you have any recollections of what was happening within the Jewish community at that time? Were they preparing for what might happen?
No, we never were prepared. This came to us as a surprise.
Did you hear about Kristallnacht?
Later on, when we start to go through the troubles, then we heard about it, because before we couldn't believe this thing can happen.
But had you heard about it before your own troubles started?
After our troubles, they started.
Okay, let's talk about some of these troubles. When you began to hear about what was happening, did your family make any attempt to leave Poland?
No, we didn't make any attempt to leave, but we couldn't believe that things can go worse than the war.
Did you share your feelings with your friends and relatives?
Yes, we were all in the same boat. We were deprived from comfortable housing because we had to give up rooms and space.
Okay, tell me what happened then.
We had to give up space for other families. Like we had 4 rooms, we had to live in 1 room only.
And who came to live with you?
My brother, which escaped from the Warsaw Ghetto with his family. Then 1 room we gave for somebody else, for a family with 2 children. My sister, Hinda, which lived outside the ghetto, she had to come in, so she lived with us too.
So how many people were living in your apartment now?
Oh, now we lived about 15 people.
And when was this?
This was in 1941, I think so, at the time.
So Radom became the ghetto for you?
Yes, yes.
And people from other communities came into Radom?
From other communities, from the surroundings, and also the Radom, which they lived through the city, they had to be squeezed in this particular area because we weren't spread in the same places we used to live.
Can you describe what the ghetto looked like? How large an area did it cover?
Just a few streets. The Walowa, Starokrakowska, the Rynek, Szpitalna, Szwarlikowska. That's it.
Was there a wall around the ghetto?
They made a fence, a wooden fence, sure. And they put up those signs. If we're going to step behind this place, we're going to be shot. And sure enough, when we want to step out, is the poles, not all of them, but an element, they would point out the finger, Jew, Jew. And when we were caught, it was very severely punished. Some they been killed even.
Was there a Jewish government within the ghetto?
In the small ghetto before was also a gemina, they call it. But they took care of certain people. But in the ghetto, it was a police station, and it was also a gemina, but on a smaller scale. We never went to them because we didn't need to go for any help.
What kinds of responsibilities did the gemina have?
Before the war, they helped people, they organized things. But during the war, everything changed. So they just took care on certain, they kept track how many people we are and what we're doing. And sometimes we needed ID cards. That's all what I know about.
Can you describe the clothing conditions in the ghetto? How did people get clothing?
They had that what they had.
And what about food?
The one which they still had money, they had some food. And the one which they couldn't afford, they were starving.
And what was happening in your living quarters? Did you have sufficient food during this period?
We had, but like meat or body, we had to have a little less than we usually had because we wanted to hold on for next day. The way things were going, we noticed that is going to be voiced. So always we thought about the tomorrow. For some people, tomorrow never came, but that's the way it was.
Were you able to continue your schooling while you were in the ghetto?
No. We were deprived from education.
What did you do then? How did you spend your time?
I spent my time just hanging around. And when they ran me up and they took me to this working place, I had to work.
What kind of work did you do?
We did carry tables and armoires and whatever, loading and unloading from wagons.
Where did all of this furniture come from?
They had new and they had old. So that's mean that they wrapped from people and some maybe from factories, whatever. We didn't question because you couldn't question.
Did you have any friends who were doing that kind of work with you?
Oh, yes. Yes, I wasn't the only one in this particular, how would I say, section. It was, we were about 100 people, men and women. They loaded coal, and the men worked by the coal, loading and unloading. And then there was another division which they made.
Go ahead.
Which they made repair the clothes for the soldiers. They call it Schneiderei. And then was another division where you stored wheat and all kind of food. But this was everything for the Germans, not for us.
Okay, tell me where you were living and where was
I was living in that Rafael where I was working. The only time which I went back to my home is when after the liquidation of the ghetto. And I found nobody. Just to take a few things, to have, like a coat or a dress. And that's it.
Did you have any knowledge of what was going on? Did you know where people had gone to?
We did find out that they went to Treblinka.
Did you know what Treblinka was?
We heard that this is a death camp, that nobody comes back from this place. But we still couldn't believe. But after the time goes by, and we didn't hear from nobody, so we realized that this is the truth, that's what it was.
How did you hear about Treblinka?
You know, people were talking about it. But it was unbelievable. How could you kill somebody for no reason at all? But later on we realized that was reality.
Can you describe your living conditions while you were doing this kind of work?
In one small room, we were 10 girls. We had those bunks, one bed on the top of the other. And then the bathroom was outside. And that's it.
What about food during this period?
They gave us food. They gave us food like for pigs. They gave us cheese, which was smelling like hell. It was impossible to eat. They gave us a ration of bread. They gave us a ration of soup. And that's all what it was to it.
Did you develop any close relationships with the people that you were with?
Of course, we were very close, very close.
And have you maintained any of those relationships?
Some they passed away already. Some they didn't survive when they went to other camps. And in few, they're still around.
What happened after that? How long did you stay doing this kind of work?
About 8 or 9 months.
What was the next place that you went to?
From there, the people which they're working in the Schneiderei, they've been sent to Blizhin. And us, they sent to the small ghetto back to Radom. This place was outside Radom. So they sent us to the small ghetto. I was fortunate enough that I got into the shop where they make clothing, and I was learning sewing. It was not too long I was there, because after that few months they sent us in another small ghetto. It was on the Shkolna. It was outside the ammunition industry. And over there we repaired baskets for ammunition for the Germans.
Was this near Radom also?
Outside Radom.
What were the living conditions like there?
Terrible. In the place where we worked, we slept. And it was terrible. We had no place where to clean ourselves, to wash. And also, the food was miserable. And it was very tough. I was sleeping with one lady from wealthy family also from Radom, Bella Silberstrom. She didn't survive. But she brought a mattress from the city. And she says, with you I would sleep, but I'll give the mattress, and you have to organize the 4 little chairs which we've been sitting and working. So I tried to do that, and we worked together, and so did everybody else.
How long did you stay in that ghetto?
In that ghetto I was staying, I can't remember how many months, but this didn't last too long, because after that, when they liquidated the Shkolna, then they sent us to Majdanek.
Do you recall when you went to Majdanek?
Oh, yes.
When was that?
They caught me on this appel. I was hiding for 3 times until they caught me. And we arrived to Majdanek on the railroad station. The people which they remained in the shop, in the sewing shop, in the city still, in the small ghetto, they brought them to the same railroad. And they joined us. It was a group of 300 people.
All women?
No, men, women, and children, young and old. And we arrived to, it was 300 of us, and we arrived to Majdanek.
Did you know what Majdanek was?
No, I never heard of it.
How long was the trip? Do you recall?
A very long trip. How long I can't say, but very long.
And how did you travel?
It was cold, and we were in the cattle wagons. And when we arrived to Majdanek, it was snow, mud, we couldn't walk. And when we came in, this was about December or January. The year must be 43 or so. When we came into this place, after they undressed us, they removed the jewelry, everything, naked, just to go to the shower, and they gave us like a dress, no warm things. They gave us the shoes, wooden shoes with paper taps when we stepped in the mud or in the snow. So the shoe fell apart. They gave me a long dress, so I ripped a piece from the bottom and I tightened up my shoe, and otherwise I would be barefoot. And after we walked out from the shower, dressed up that way, on the other end, in another field, because each place was a field. Field 1, 2, 3. We noticed some beautiful, beautiful ladies. There were 300. Those were the remnants from Warsaw Ghetto.
How did you know this?
They told us from a distance. We spoke to them because we couldn't go close. It wasn't allowed. And the wires, the barbed wires, they were electrified. We couldn't approach. They watched us, and we had to stay right there. But somehow we did talk to them. And they asked us from where we're coming. We say from Radom. When we said that, it's one lady I remember. She says, "My name is Krantz. My parents, they came from Radom." So we asked them, "What are you doing here? What's going on?" So they told us that all the Jews from Warsaw, they perished here. They showed us from a distance for the crematorium, for the chimney, that they were cremated, killed, burned, and they witnessed those things, and that they're going to be sent to Auschwitz to be gassed, which it was so. Because later on, when we came to Birkenau, and we asked about them, nobody knew anything.
Had the uprising already taken place in Warsaw at that time?
It was already over. It was already over. The Warsaw problem was already finished.
Had you heard about the uprising in Warsaw?
Yes, we did. We did.
How did you get this news?
Just sometimes we found a newspaper, so we read.
What kind of work did you do at Majdanek?
I was sorting the clothes after those which they perished.
Can you describe what you had to do?
You know, we had to find things like socks to make a pair, like shoes to make a pair. In the meantime, we had a chance to put something on us too, not to be so naked. But we had to be very careful because it wasn't allowed.
What were the food conditions like in Majdanek?
You know, it's just the same. No food. They gave us just to live. The bread was so wet, rationed, a little bit of water soup, coffee, black coffee, which was, I think, they put in some stuff, medications, you know, most for the girls. And that's it.
And what were the living conditions like?
We had those bunks like you see on television, the people looking out. We were 3 or 4 girls on one bridge, on one bed. And this was stacked up like 3 floors.
Did you have any contact with any of the Germans at this time?
No, they just were, you know, watching us, always with a whip, with dogs. Majdanek was a hell of a place.
Did you have roll call or appels at Majdanek?
Oh, yes, twice a day.
Can you describe what that was like?
In the morning, before we went to work, the dead people, they were counted with the living. And in the evening, when we came back, was the same.
Now, earlier when I had spoken to you, you told me about you had come to Majdanek wearing an earring.
Yes. You know, when I was a very baby, my parents, they put down on my ears earring, pierced ears. When I came to Majdanek, on my left ear, I couldn't remove that earring so fast. So the Nazi, the German, he ripped me the ear apart. He ripped out this earring. It didn't open still. So then we were afraid to go to doctors or to go to, in a sick room, because if you were sick, so they took you away. So you had to be strong with the pains and everything. So I hold my ear, and it grew together, but not completely. And I suffered a long time with that ear, like every 6 months I had an infection. And this went on for all these years, about 50 years. I went to the doctors, and they told me, don't touch it. It's just once in a while you're getting this infection. But I couldn't take it anymore, and I went to a dermatologist, Dr. Schultz on Park Avenue. And I said, Doctor, I can't wear an earring. I will never pierce my ears because of that case. And I told him the story. I said, is it possible to do something for me? He says, yes, I'll do something. And I'm very confident that I will succeed. And sure enough, I had this appointment with him. He cut out the center from that cyst, which it was a cyst, and with stitches, he repaired it, and now I am back a normal person. I don't suffer from my ear anymore. But I will never pierce my ears.
How long did you stay at Majdanek?
In Majdanek, we were quite a few months. And from Majdanek, they shipped us to Plaszów. But in Majdanek, we were wearing striped clothes, like you have most seen. And in those clothes, we came to Plaszów.
How did you get to Plaszów?
Well, it was a transport. They liquidated Majdanek because the Russians were approaching. And they sent us to Majdanek with all those SS women in Get. They came with our transport. They've been watching us.
Can you tell me a little more about Get?
Well, he was a monster. You couldn't look at him, and otherwise he was dangerous.
And was he the person who was featured in the movie Schindler's List?
Yes, that's the one.
He became the camp commander at Plaszów.
Oh, yes. Yes, he came from Majdanek to Plaszów.
What were the living conditions like at Plaszów?
Well, the living conditions in Plaszów for us, they were the same than in Majdanek, because we had nothing. We had those striped outfits. We brought those Nazis that came with us, and the people, which they were before, they were shocked to see. They didn't believe what they're seeing, because we told them already what we went through and what it is. But in Plaszów, we went through a selection.
Can you describe that?
Well, the selection in Plaszów was a little bit harder than it shows on Schindler's List. They loaded, they took away the children on those trucks which you see on Schindler's List. They put the children and the elderly people. A lot of mothers, they went with them too. They didn't want to give away the children. They undressed us naked on the open. We weren't the only one, the whole camp. And the Nazis, the Germans, they were standing, including Goetz. He was the head of the bunch. And they checked us out. If you were young, you weren't wrinkled from starvation, they put you on the right. And if they judge you that you are not able to work, they put you on the left. And you went in the trucks together with the elderly and the children.
Did you have any idea as to where they were taking these people?
Yes, we know they're going to go perish in Auschwitz. We heard about it and we believed everything we heard.
What kind of work did you do at Plaszów?
In the beginning, I was pushing those carriages, like you see where you come into the camp. If you noticed on Schindler's List, when you come in to your left, it was a Steinbruch. Those carriages with the stones, you brought in one end, and then they tell you to load and to take to the other end. Later on, well, this was going on a little while. And then they need people to work in the salt mines in Wieliczka.
How far was Wieliczka from Plaszów?
I have no idea, but it wasn't too far.
How did you get there?
Well, they picked me, they rounded me up, and they loaded us also on trucks, and they sent us to Wieliczka, the whole group.
Can you describe what Wieliczka was like?
It's salt mines. We went down with the elevator. On the ground was wet because salt is wet, and we had to. They gave us a hammer, and they gave us, the little lamps, like you say, the coal miners wearing, and we had to chisel the walls, and then we had those wagons, just like they loaded the stones, they loaded to fill up those carriages and push them to a certain place, unload them and bring back the empty.
Who was supervising this work?
Capos.
And who were the capos?
The capos over there, they were German criminals. You had some civilians too. They were Poles. And, they always kept us under the whip.
I was going to ask, how did they treat you?
Miserable. If they didn't like it, or if you didn't move too fast, they whipped you, just like this.
Did you work in the salt mines every day?
Yes, for quite a while, about 3 months. But then it was a case. When they counted us, they were missing 2 people. But the people they weren't missing, they were there. But they were very tired, and they fell asleep in a corner. It was dark. It's a mine. So they took us back to Plaszów. And they counted us, and the 2 people, the 2 boys, they were missing. They were young boys. Even the parents were working in the mine too. The name was Schlufman. They were from Sosnowiec. And when they brought us back to Plaszów, the next day they found the boys in the mines. And they brought them to Plaszów. And they took out everybody on an appeal. And they built, how do you call it, where you hang the people?
Gallows.
A gallows. And they brought us 2 boys. The parents were on this appeal too. And they hanged those 2 boys, young boys, maybe 20 years old. And the rest of us, which we couldn't look, they would whip us to look in this way. It passed by an SS. You have to look in this direction. And they hanged these boys. After that, it was an end to Wieliczka. They sent us, they rounded us up, 100 women. Because the Radom, we were standing always together, close to one another, because we didn't know too many people. We lost confidence because with all the situation, which we didn't trust nobody, we trust each other. So the majority was Radom, 100 women. And they sent us to a Gerätelage.
Describe, what is a Gerätelage?
The Gerätelage, this was a factory which they had the supplies for the telegraph, like those telegraphic posts. Or they had those big rolls of cables. They have all those hooks in telephones, which hooking up telephones or telegraph, and a lot of those things. So like 3 women, or 2 sometimes, we had to carry one of those big telephone posts. And it wasn't easy. It was very hard. It was the same life, the same conditions, the same deprivation. And we just had to go on as long as we possibly could stay on our feet.
Why do you think you survived?
Just by accident. it was just by accident, because I didn't try to survive. It's just I was lucky, and by accident.
Have there been any decisions that you've made or things that you have done that were influenced by your Shoah experience?
Not especially. Just, we were pushed around. I accepted that way. And I knew sometimes I have to die, so I have to die. As long as I could work, I will live. But if I give in, it's the end. Like it was with other people. Because if you were sick, they shot you. You were very sick, you died. And that's the way it was.
Do you think about the Shoah often?
Every minute of the day. When I make progress in my life, or I see my children, grandchildren being so great, can't forget why this happened to us, for what reason. We are not criminals, we are good people. Why are we so excluded? It must be only jealousy. That's why we have all those hate friends. Why do they hate us? This question, why, doesn't go out from your mind for a minute to go through all those things. You have no parents, no sister, no brother, no uncle, no aunts, no cousins. Everything perished, all alone. Thank God, I was fortunate to marry decent men, have decent children, and that's what I have. It's more than money can buy.
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us. We're going to continue in a short while when we meet your husband, Henry.
Okay.
Paula, would you introduce us to your husband?
Yes, I would gladly do that. This is my husband, Henry. I'm married to him for 51 years. We had a hard life, but a good life. Honest, decent. I couldn't ask for any better.
Henry, that's a tough act to follow. Would you like to say something?
Well, I met my wife in Radom. She was after the concentration camp. And I look on her, and I could not realize that will be really my future. But I realized she's in a good time. She come from the parents who was. I know the parents. I know before the war. I know her sister, and then I know her brother too. They was a very good family. I think that was my choice. I says to myself, I hope this will be my choice and this will be my future for all my life. Now we are together already for 50 years. And I realized if we spend the time, we have 2 children, they're very good off, and she brought them up in the right way. And we succeed all our life. That's what I'm thinking. And we are always together, we travel together, we're going out together. We never left alone. I never left her alone. And I think we are a good life up to the end of our life. This will be our future with our children. We enjoyed life, the whole our life.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to look at some of your photographs.
Mm-hmm.
This is the voice document I had after the liberation. It's giving me, they gave me in Linz, in Austria, in the DP camp. This is my ID card.
And this is your photograph after the war.
And this is my photograph. That's the way I looked then. The hair were very short because they start to grow after Birkenau and the typhoid. This is the picture of my son's family. From the left is my son Alain Jacques, my daughter-in-law Carol, my youngest grandson Eric, my middle grandson Daniel. He is in University of Pennsylvania. Next year he's graduating with a degree in bioengineering. Outstanding student. And my granddaughter Judy, which is in medical school of medicine in Tel Aviv. It's made in Aspen, Colorado, last winter. This picture was taken in the Radom Society in Tel Aviv. When we came, they gave us a party, a very beautiful reception. And those are my friends, which we survived together. We've been to many camps together. It's Fredka Vargon. She lives in Haifa. Myself, Bella Friedman from Los Angeles, Tosha Lastman, she lives in Tel Aviv, Basha, she lives in Tel Aviv, and Balcha Vargon, she lives in Haifa. We are like sisters because we went through all the hard times together.
Thank you all for watching. As you heard, as the Russians advanced through Poland, she was moved to various camps in Germany, into Malchow, Gundelsdorf, and Ravensbrück. She was liberated at Malchow by the Russians. And afterwards, my parents found their way to France and then to the US, where they had great success in their lives through support of our family, support of Israel, building businesses, and building a new life here in America. So you can see the Holocaust was real. Her testimony is just one of many to tell us that we should never forget a man's inhumanity to men and women. We should never forget, as LIZKOR instructs us to remember. If people have questions, if you want to put some in the chat, feel free to do so now. Also, if you want to send me questions on email, my email address is very simple. It's Alain, my name, at Hanover.org. I see in the chat that you have a couple of, am I on? Yes. So there are a couple of thank yous. I appreciate that. Question, what led my parents to leave France? So actually in the late 50s, my parents were concerned about the Russians moving into Western Europe because of the Cold War and the threats from the Russians then. And they had a brother in the US who they had stayed in touch with, and he offered to sponsor them. And they were lucky enough to get their number come up on the immigration roster. And so they took the opportunity in 1957 to come to the US to get away from Europe. How did this history of your parents impact your life? Well, obviously, my mother was very strict with us. So I had very strong discipline as a child. And also, I respected what they did and worked hard. And, they worked they both of them worked in my dad's, in the business. And my sister and I were at home. And, we stuck to the books, and it affected me to be concentrating on my studies. And also I helped my father in the business, and it helped teach me a little bit about entrepreneurship, which then led me to later become an entrepreneur. So it had a big impact on my life. Do you know what the process was like for your mom to share her testimony with the Shoah Foundation? Was she hesitant to share her story? Yeah, I think she seldom wanted to talk about it because it obviously brought up a lot of grief. And she didn't, want to talk about it much. Of course, I remember one instance we were having dinner with my daughter and son, and they asked about it, and she was very open in telling them, telling Judy and Eric what happened. So when other people asked, she would tell what happened, but she was very short in her stories. In terms of the Shoah Foundation, the Shoah approached the Radom Society in New York, which my dad was actually president, and asked for testimony from survivors. There's actually was a group of about 15 to 20 survivors in the Radom Society in New York. And many of them gave testimony. And that's how come that this tape came about, because of the fact that, they felt an obligation to tell the story. And the Spielberg group, the Shoah Foundation, approached them to do it. How old were you when they started telling you their story? I probably recognized, by age 5 or 6, what had happened in bits and pieces. By listening to discussions. They actually spoke a lot of Yiddish, which I started to understand because they were trying to use Yiddish to have me, to avoid having me hear about it. But I heard enough Yiddish to start learning and understanding it. So I would listen into their stories and learned about it. And, but my mom was obviously upset about it. And my sister and I shied away from bringing it up directly. I think I got all the questions here. So I'll be in Temple. I'm usually at Temple on security duty every week. So you can contact me there and ask me more if you need to. Thank you for spending the time to listen to her story and hear about her experiences tonight.